In the long reign of a single queen, Britain changed the world and was itself utterly transformed. Queen Victoria came to the throne in 1837. By the time she died in 1901, we had made the modern world. It was a time of brilliant engineering, pioneering innovation, all of it driven by fearless men and women who dreamt big and shaped the country we live in today. Fast and effective new transport systems shrank the world.
You travel further, faster. The railways compress space and time.
Startling innovations above and below ground saved lives.
We'd grab the saw like this.
It's more like carpentry than surgery. Groundbreaking ideas nurtured our minds and souls.
It was feeling like you were dancing in one of the great European palaces.
And a revolution in law and order set us on course for the freedoms we take for granted today.
You're brought from the darkness of the prisons into this glory.
It's fantastic, isn't it?
It is.
This is the story of how the Victorians built Britain. As well as amazing feats of engineering, oh my goodness, one of the most enduring legacies of the Victorian era is how we spend our leisure time. You'd be forgiven for thinking that the Victorians were all work and no play. But the Britons, who were on top of the world in terms of architecture, engineering, industry, also worked hard at having fun.
It was about novelty, it was about thrill.
It made a mill girl feel like a duchess for the day.
Queen Victoria's subjects would loosen their stays, let their hair down, with a new idea, which was to change the coast of Britain and the lives of 41 million Victorians. It's called the Great British Seaside Holiday. Prince Albert was a great believer in the health benefits of fresh sea air and a dip in the ocean. But at the start of Queen Victoria's reign, the seaside mini-break was only something you did if you had money. But all that was about to change. Seaside resorts like Scarborough and Skegness were springing up all over the country. But it was Blackpool in Lancashire that led the way. In 1837, when Victoria came to the throne, it was a sleepy seaside village. This isolated outcrop would become world famous as the capital of fun and give birth to the holiday as we know it, but not without one key Victorian ingredient. The 19th century and the age of steam saw a huge expansion in Britain's railways. For the first time, the middle classes of cities like Liverpool and Manchester were able to indulge in leisure travel. And in 1846, a new railway station opened in the heart of Blackpool on Talbot Road, which meant they could get to the seaside. The Blackpool day trip had arrived. The coming of the railway meant coastal resorts all around the country were hit by waves of visitors. Blackpool businessmen, keen to tap into day trippers' spending power, competed to provide suitable entertainment. And for the Victorians, that meant a pier. Historically, piers were built solely for ships to load and unload goods. But in 1814, Ryde on the Isle of Wight became the first place in the country to have a pier with a dedicated section for people to stroll out over the sea. The Promenade Pier was born, and in 1863, Blackpool's North Pier opened for business.
It's really a magnificent structure, and the idea of holding it all down with the big girders and bracing with these trusses between the things gives it an enormous amount of strength.
Yeah. Historian and author Peter Walton is an expert on how the Victorians transformed the British seaside. How did this North Pier come about?
Well, Blackpool at that time was a smallish resort, but middle class, and it compared itself with Southport, just down the coast. Southport had built a pier 2 years previously, and they didn't want their resort to fall behind Southport in attracting the middle-class visitor.
A group of Blackpool's leading businessmen got together and stumped up £5 each to fund an architectural competition. The goal? To design a pier that would be bigger and better than their local rivals.
The winner of the competition was one Eugenius Birch.
Was that seriously his name?
That was seriously his name.
Eugenius?
Yes.
What sort of man was he?
He was obsessed by engineering, but he was also a man of great imagination and was part of the great sort of 19th century evolution of industrial Britain. Engineers who go anywhere, do anything, build you anything. And he built piers.
Eugenius Birch was responsible for 14 of Britain's best-loved Victorian piers, including the now derelict West Pier in Brighton. However, he made his name designing Margate Jetty on the Kent coast, where he deployed a new construction method previously used to lay the foundations of lighthouses. It proved so resilient to the elements, he adopted the same methods here in Blackpool.
He had pioneered using cast iron instead of wood. He drove cast iron piles in, but they were screw piles.
So instead of straight into the sand and then the clay, it sort of screwed down into it.
Yeah. That had at least two advantages. One, it was quick, much quicker than using a hammer to drive a pile in. And the other was that the clay formed itself round the leaves of the screw and anchored the pile in very solidly, but so solidly that some of his piers have had to be blown up finally. And yet the foundations refused to go away.
In total, around 760 tons of iron were used in the pier's construction to help withstand the notoriously unpredictable Irish Sea.
While the pier was being built, a great storm blew up and it knocked some of the piles down because the decking over the top wasn't complete. So they decided that they would raise it by 3 feet.
Despite the teething problems, by May 1863, the pier was ready. The entry fee was set at twopence, equivalent to around £5 today. So, when it was opened, who was it aimed at?
It was aimed at the more quality visitor, and it was designed to offer them a promenading solution because the promenade on the land was just not quite fit for purpose. It was a bit muddy, a bit sandy. The pier offered a very smooth, stable surface, but it also took them out across the sea.
Did they come principally for the sea air and all that sort of thing, or did they come to be seen?
They came for the sea air, they came for their health. That is what is driving visitors. But then while they are here, you get a culture developing. Promenading is an activity where you dress your best, people see you in your best. You know, you are on show, especially on this pier, you are on show.
And showing off.
And showing off, definitely.
How successful was it when it opened?
Extremely successful. They estimated at the time the visitor take would be 200,000 a year. In the first year, it had 275,000 visits. The second year, it went up to 400,000. So it was phenomenally successful.
Blackpool's tourism boom was originally driven by middle-class visitors. But as factory workers in the industrial heartlands across the northwest began to get more leisure time, they too made a beeline for the coast. That gave the owners of the North Pier a real dilemma. Their well-to-do clientele weren't exactly pleased to be rubbing noses with the working classes. A solution would have to be found. The Victorians are renowned for leaving us with iconic buildings and groundbreaking feats of engineering. But we also have them to thank for the great British summer holidays. And it all started here in Blackpool. By the middle of the Victorian era, Blackpool was booming. It was the northern day trip destination. Where once it had been the playground for the wealthy, now all the social classes could come here and get a lungful of healthy sea air, take the waters, thanks to the spreading railway and passenger fares of a penny a mile. The new seaside resorts were booming all over the country. But it wasn't just day trippers they wanted to appeal to. As factories and offices moved towards a shorter working week, the concept of the weekend was born. And in the north of England, people were also increasingly enjoying a summer break, known as a Wakes Week. It was originally a religious idea, but became a week away from work. Wakes Weeks helped to create Britain's first summer holidays. Between June and September, different towns took it in turns to close their factories for a week of maintenance. It was essentially an enforced and unpaid holiday. But the Victorian workers weren't complaining. They were packing their swimsuits and heading for the beach. The age of mass tourism had arrived. Factory workers were determined to enjoy their new leisure time. But that meant resorts like Blackpool suddenly became more crowded. The newly mobile working class had discovered the joys of Blackpool's North Pier. The trouble was that in the Victorian era of pretty strict class divisions, their presence wasn't wholly welcomed on a pier that had been created with the rich in mind. Blackpool's business community was faced with a conundrum. They wanted to keep their wealthy clients, but the working classes also had money to spend. So in 1868, a new pier opened, designed to attract the custom of the ordinary man and woman. Why was the second pier so significant?
Central Pier is really the first time Blackpool is marketing itself to the working classes. It's built, but it doesn't do very well. It's a bit of a dismal failure, really. And it doesn't revive until they hire Robert Bickerstaff to be general manager.
Bickerstaff proved to be an inspired choice. As the coxswain of the first Blackpool lifeboat, he was a man of the sea. He also had a keen eye for business.
Immediately, he runs an excursion steamer from the end of the pier to Southport, and he gets flyers printed, he goes around the town, and he gets 250 people to go on it. Meanwhile, he drums up a band and puts them on the pier so that when they get back, there's music and entertainment. And because of that, they stay on the pier. And that really is the birth of Central Pier.
But quite a contrast to the North Pier, or what the original idea of the North Pier would be.
Beer would be sold on the pier, dancing and music happened and in the steamers. And it was for people's fun and amusement.
But as Blackpool boomed, it didn't stop at two piers. The Victoria, or South Pier, opened in 1893. And there was enough people coming to Blackpool to make three piers work?
Yes, there were. People were coming in by their droves and making the most of it. It's jam-packed with entertainment.
You live and breathe this stuff, don't you?
I love Blackpool. It's the best.
The Victorian pleasure pier had proved a profit-making enterprise, so the idea was exported around the world. In Britain, investors continued to plough their money into seaside resorts around the country, and the number of visitors kept on soaring. For Victorian holidaymakers, part of the experience was writing home about it. So in 1870, the post office issued the first postcards. Visitors to Blackpool loved to send home images of its famous landmarks. But with the back of the postcard for the address only, any message had to be squeezed around the picture. Just enough room for "Wish you were here." Blackpool's success was based on catering to holidaymakers' every need. The emphasis was on fun and providing novel new experiences that people would pay for. When the world-famous Blackpool Tower opened in 1894, it was an instant sensation. It was here that Blackpool's fun seekers were taken to dizzying new heights. Blackpool Tower was reportedly inspired by the Eiffel Tower in Paris and proved one of the great engineering feats of the Victorian era. But financial problems meant it very nearly didn't get built.
Who was behind it at the start?
Well, originally the idea came from a company based in the Isle of Man. What they did was they got people's money, they got construction underway to give confidence, but then they basically disappeared with the money.
That would have been the end of the tower, but for the efforts of one man to save it. John Bickerstaff, or Mr. Blackpool as he came to be known, was the cousin of Robert Bickerstaff, who turned round the fortunes of Central Pier.
Bickerstaff, who's the great figure behind the tower, steps in, refinances the whole process, and actually, because he's involved, other local business people come on board, and that's how he saved this tower.
Building the tower also required a huge engineering effort. The 4 enormous legs were sunk in a foundation of clay, concrete and steel to help withstand the gale-force winds that regularly buffet the promenade.
It's a project on an epic scale, isn't it?
Yes, 2,500 tons of steel.
Gosh.
It took 3 years to build, £300,000 to... the cost of it was just absolutely staggering at the time.
£300,000, what would that be these days?
Around 24 million. And, you know, of course, it was an incredibly Victorian achievement. They absolutely loved their engineering.
At 518 feet and 47 stories high, Blackpool Tower was Britain's tallest building. Victorian ingenuity also provided a means of getting to the top. The world's first ever powered lift was built in 1823 by British engineers Burton and Horner. Their steam-powered ascending room gave visitors to the London Colosseum in Regent's Park a panoramic view of the skyline, but it was slow and unreliable. So the designers of Blackpool Tower turned to the latest in lift technology. 3 gas engines powered 2 hydraulic lifts, capable of whisking visitors to the top in around 60 seconds.
Wow. You get a real idea of just how big the beach is from here. I mean, what it must have been like for the Victorians.
For the average Victorian who'd only ever climbed a flight or 2 of stairs, the biggest thrill was stepping out onto one of the viewing platforms.
Oh dear.
And there are still 2 more flights of stairs to climb to reach the highest viewpoint.
What a view. What a view. And you could, just being up this high must have been an extraordinary novelty for Victorians.
Yes, and that describes it perfectly. It was about novelty, it was about thrill. They loved fairground rides, and of course this would have been something absolutely unique to them. So it must have been incredible coming up in those lifts to actually get to the top and see all of this, a view that, you know, unless you're on top of a mountain, you would never normally have had.
No, it's difficult, isn't it, to put yourself in the position of Victorians with their much more limited experience. What did they make of it, do you think?
I think it was the holiday experience, certainly for most Victorians in the Northwest, mill workers particularly. Of course, the tower, there's the great legend that it was built on bales of cotton, because that's not about its foundations, it's about the money from the mill workers that came and spent here. So one of the world's first working class consumer economies, perhaps.
Yeah. How much did it cost?
Well, of course, to come into the tower itself was 6pence. That would have been quite a bit of money, and you probably would have only done it once in your trip, but you would have been able to say, I went to the top of Blackpool Tower. Like today, we are prepared to pay for an experience. And that was exactly, I think, how they saw it. You know, the figures showed that it was incredibly popular from the day it opened.
In fact, the tower was such a success, it instantly turned a profit for its shareholders and helped make its principal investor, John Bickerstaff, a wealthy man. Blackpool's places of pleasure were attracting Victorian holidaymakers in their thousands, all keen to spend their hard-earned wages in the entertainment capital of Great Britain. During the day, the seafront attracted young and old, rich and poor alike. But when the sun went down, the fun ended. The beach needed to find a way to make daytime longer. So in 1879, the council invested a whopping £5,000, that's over 600 grand in today's money, in finding a solution. Blackpool turned to the latest invention, electricity. A British engineer, Frederick Hale Holmes, had patented the electric arc light in 1846, a light so powerful and so expensive, the Victorians were at a bit of a loss to know what to do with it. During the 1850s and 60s, Hale Holmes and the inventor Michael Faraday pioneered the use of the new technology in lighthouses. Blackpool had a light bulb moment. As the sun set on a chilly September evening, 8 huge arc lights were hoisted 60 feet in the air, and as 16 engines powered up, the lights burst into life, bathing the onlookers in what was swiftly dubbed Blackpool's artificial sunlight. It's difficult for us to imagine, but the Victorians were used only to dim oil lamps. It must have been a startling, exciting experience. Just one lamp gave off as much light as 6,000 candles. It was beyond anything the Victorian public had ever seen. The world's first free light show proved so popular, it gave birth to the famous Blackpool illuminations. Today, over 1 million bulbs light up a 6-mile stretch of the seafront between August and November every year. No wonder the town's been dubbed the Las Vegas of Lancashire. So, even before Edison invented the light bulb, Blackpool's revellers were, well, tripping the light fantastic. Victorian ingenuity had helped Blackpool become the seaside capital of Britain. But it was in danger of becoming a victim of its own success, until another piece of engineering genius would come to the rescue. In the late 19th century, holidaymakers were flocking to coastal resorts all over the country. The Victorian Britons were beginning to reap the fruits of their labour. More free time coincided with much better public transport, and so the holiday was born. The first person to realise the potential of this was a Baptist minister from Leicester. In 1841, Thomas Cook started organising train excursions. He then hit on the novel idea of throwing in bed and board, in the process inventing the package holiday. He even organised trips overseas, although for most people, a staycation was the only option. Blackpool had become the Victorian holiday hotspot of the north and was keen to retain the title. The artificial sunlight of the promenade had become a magnet for curious tourists, but the town planners thought this new electricity business could be more than just decorative. They believed electricity could also help provide the transport infrastructure needed to ferry holidaymakers up and down the seafront.
It just looks right.
It is. It's beautiful. It's a lovely thing.
On the 29th of September 1885, the Mayor of Manchester officially opened Blackpool's now famous electric tram system. So, Brian, this is how the Victorians got from A to B?
It was indeed, yes.
How much of a first was it?
In Blackpool, very much a first. We were the first electric street tramway in the British Isles, which is quite a remarkable achievement. Blackpool's motto was always progress. And at the time, you know, everybody was towing their trams around by horses. And they wanted something different and unique. And they actually waited a considerably long period until, by accident, they went to Manchester to have a look at what was a children's fairground ride. It was a small electric locomotive pulling some carriages around a circular track. And our chaps looked at that and thought, wow, wouldn't this be great if we could scale one of these up to full size and stick it on the seafront? And so they asked the inventor, which is a chap called Holroyd Smith, whether he could do that. And he immediately jumped at the challenge and came to Blackpool, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Michael Holroyd Smith was a giant of Victorian engineering. In 1888, he was responsible for the electrification of the City and South London Railway, the first deep-level tube line in the world. But he's best known for inventing the electric tram. This original 1901 example is still in working order. When it started, how did it work?
when you're starting out from scratch, you don't know how to go about it. And that was the case with Holroyd Smith. He didn't know how safely to get the electricity into the tram car. So he decided to lay the mains cable in a slot in the centre of the track. And inevitably, two awful things happened. The first is that on a dry day, the wind used to blow the sand onto the track, and it used to short-circuit the tramway because sand's a very good insulator. So it severed the tram car from its power supply. Equally, when the weather was particularly bad and we had high tides, of course the tide used to come over and flood the track, and of course water and electricity don't go very well together, so it used to blow all the trips at the substation.
So they'd break down and they'd have to bring the horses in to tow them along.
That's right.
I mean, how often did that happen?
Quite often, but the system was inevitably very successful, otherwise it wouldn't have survived.
The troublesome electric tracks were replaced by overhead cables in 1899, which led to a more reliable service. But Blackpool's electric trams were designed to be more than just a transport system.
It's a big step, isn't it?
They're huge.
Yeah.
People obviously were very athletic in those days.
They must have been.
For the Victorian holidaymaker, they were a luxury experience.
Look at this is what gets me, Brian. Look at I mean, how much effort and skill must have gone into, you know, just having this beautiful decorative woodwork in an ordinary tram. The thing that strikes me most, it's a bit more decorative down below than upstairs.
Yes, I think that's largely to do with the fact that the ladies stayed downstairs.
Ah,
you wouldn't want to go upstairs in a long flowing dress.
They're quite strict, aren't they? They've got these notices that we can see up here. Spitting strictly prohibited.
Yes.
Were they strict?
They were quite strict, actually, yes. Of course, spitting was, very common in those days. And, of course, there was a hazard that if you had your window open or the tram car had no roof and people were spitting from the top deck, it could be quite unpleasant.
So, to what extent do you think were these trams an essential part of the overall Blackpool experience?
I think they were crucial. They moved an awful lot of people up and down the seafront and got them to where they needed to go effectively and efficiently.
Blackpool's trams were so revolutionary, soon most major British towns and cities followed suit. They also became popular around the world. Sadly, by the 1930s, the rise of the motor vehicle meant Britain's trams were in decline. But over a century since their heyday, they're re-emerging in British cities as environmentally friendly transport. Another Blackpool icon invented by the Victorians is Seaside Rock, made possible by the sugar trade with the Caribbean.
In the 19th century, sugar was plentiful, and the Victorians' teeth were sweet.
In 1887, Seaside Rock was invented by a former miner turned confectionery manufacturer, Ben Bullock, while on holiday here.
Victorians use the same recipe as we do today, sugar and glucose. In the Victorian days, they didn't have machines. What they had is that big lump of rock, and a woman would tie the rope on the end of it. Then another woman would pull it. So you get Blackpool Rock.
Queen Victoria was something of a pioneer of the great British seaside holiday. For the monarch, it was all about health, and the upper classes were keen to follow her example. Blackpool actually drew its crowds from right across the social spectrum, but it hadn't forgotten its roots as a resort for the privileged.
While the Victorian era had brought about social change, the well-to-do still preferred to keep themselves apart. In Blackpool, they'd often stay at the Imperial Hotel, which first opened its doors in 1867.
Well, you could imagine if, passing here, you need a lot of space to be a Victorian lady.
It's true.
Particularly a posh one.
Especially a posh one, especially a posh one.
Alison, what was the idea behind the Hotel Imperial?
Well, they wanted somewhere that was just that little bit special. There were hotels in Blackpool, but it was becoming a resort in itself, and they wanted something just to top the rest.
They were going for the posh people with it.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. The top echelon of society.
Today, no luxury hotel is complete without a spa, another idea the Victorians pioneered.
So, Michael, are you ready for this? Our secret.
Wow.
What do you think?
It's Aladdin's cave, isn't it, down here?
The Imperial Hotel's Turkish baths were forgotten to time and for decades used as storage, but they've recently been uncovered.
It's kind of Victorian and yet exotic at the same time, isn't it?
Just what they wanted for a hotel like this.
For the Victorians in the north, bathing in Blackpool's waters was becoming a holiday staple. But for those who wanted to enjoy its health benefits without enduring the crowded beaches, a pumping system was introduced that allowed seawater to be piped to shore into the Turkish baths.
And the baths themselves, that was all part of the sales pitch, wasn't it? The healthy air in Blackpool, come and improve your health, Turkish bath, hydropathic they call them, didn't
Hydropathic hotel.
What does
We
that
became a
mean?
hydropathic hotel in 1890. It's about coming to Blackpool to take the waters. There was a plunge pool in one of the rooms, which was salt water. And people used to come here and just come and relax. And it was a very special part of their holiday.
The Victorians were great believers in the healing powers of water, but the baths eventually fell into disuse before being unearthed 7 years ago.
I mean, it's like discovering Pompeii, isn't it, on a very small scale?
Privileged, I think, is the only word that I could tell you, Michael. It's just incredible that this is still here and we get to see it and show it on a daily basis.
The Imperial Hotel was just one of Blackpool's many attractions. And competition for custom was fierce. The stage was set for the Battle of the Ballrooms.
The Great British Seaside was, for the most part, a place of outside entertainment. But let's face it, it's Blackpool. It's winter. It's freezing. The Victorians may have been hardier than us, but they wanted to get in out of the cold. They began looking for their pleasures indoors.
And so in 1878, Blackpool's Winter Gardens first opened for business. This giant Victorian entertainment complex housed a range of amusements, all under one roof, including space for promenading, a theatre, and the Floral Hall. But the pièce de résistance was the Empress Ballroom, which was added in 1896.
Gosh, it's the big reveal, isn't it?
Yes.
With over 2,000 feet of floor space, it could accommodate hundreds of dancers.
The People's Palace.
Absolutely huge.
The space of it all is enormous. What made this ballroom special when it was built?
The sheer size of it. It's a third larger, more or less, than the Blackpool Tower ballroom. And when it was built, it was much more elaborate.
And its grandeur for the working man and woman.
Indeed. It was the idea of feeling like you were dancing in one of the great European palaces.
And what was the response of people when they first came into this ballroom?
Do you see people, even today, walking through the door, and the first thing they do is they go. And that is, I'm guessing, the kind of reaction that they had then.
The Empress Ballroom had become the place for ballroom dancing in Blackpool, much to the dismay of John Bickerstaff, the man behind Blackpool Tower. His Tower ballroom had opened 2 years earlier, but was less ornate. So in 1899, he called in the celebrated theatre designer Frank Matcham to give it a complete makeover. His lavish creation outdid the Empress Ballroom and has become, strictly speaking, one of Britain's best-loved buildings.
It's huge, isn't it? And kind of really over the top.
I know, but I think the point about it is it's just going to give people a sense of splendour.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, there's a bit of Rococo, there's a bit of Baroque. What I love most is obviously bid me discourse, I will enchant thine ears.
A bit of Shakespeare.
A bit of Shakespeare.
And the man who built it, how important was he?
They brought in Frank Matcham, who was at the time at the height of his powers. Architect, wonderful designer, now recognised as the greatest theatre designer of the 19th century.
Matcham's designs included the London Palladium, the Hippodrome and the Hackney Empire, all in his trademark ornate style, making him one of the most sought-after designers of his era.
What does it say about Blackpool in Victorian times that it could attract somebody of his fame and talent to build this ballroom?
Visitor numbers are going from 1 million to 4 million. So they're needing to build these incredible attractions, and so they want the greatest and the best.
This floor, is it just me, or can you actually...
No, it is a mahogany foot-sprung floor. Many thousands of pieces of mahogany, and what you do...
I know this, 30,000 blocks of mahogany.
Yeah, very good. And if you get 1,000 people dancing on this floor, it is like being on an ocean-going yacht as you go backwards and forwards. It was absolutely built for dancing.
How did this renovated ballroom change the experience of the Victorian holidaymaker from the north of England?
There's a fantastic quote about the ballroom where it says, it made a mill girl feel like a duchess for the day. Somebody in a kind of less prestigious job could actually mingle in this ballroom and through the style and grace of your dancing attract a better companion.
And from your point of view, standing in the middle of the dance floor here, what does it do for you?
It makes me cry.
Really?
It always makes me cry because I think it's the most beautiful room. I honestly do think it's a privilege and honour to walk into the Blackpool Tower ballroom.
Ballroom dancing wasn't the only indoor attraction on offer in the Tower complex. Frank Matcham also designed the interiors of the famous Tower Circus.
Hey! Oh my goodness. It is amazing, isn't it? When you walk in and it kind of smacks you in both eyes.
Yeah.
Doesn't it? Every single surface seems to be decorated, doesn't it? How long did it all take?
It only took them the winter season of 1899. Can you believe it?
No.
I don't know how fast they worked back then, but they sure did knock out some great interiors very quickly.
It's so ornate, the whole thing. It's kind of slightly Moorish, isn't it?
Yes, Frank Matcham apparently holidayed in the Alhambra in Andalusia in Spain, and so he took inspiration very much from that holiday and you know, created this amazing palace. We're actually underneath the tower directly. We're in between the four legs, these structures here that you can see on either side.
Oh, those are the legs?
Yeah, they're the legs of the tower. The Victorians loved coming to Blackpool. You know, it wasn't just about going on the beach and taking in the waters anymore. It was about what else you could do in the evening and when the rain starts to pour down and the weather's no good outside.
Over the years, a typical night at the Tower Circus would include acrobats, clowns, and long before animal welfare rules, performing bears.
And what are the main features of it, though? I mean, the ring is a special size, isn't it?
Yes. So it's an international standard, 42 feet in diameter. It's exactly the right diameter for a horse to gallop and for a trick rider or performer to balance on the back of the horse, doing things like juggling or somersaulting.
What was the main attraction?
Particularly for this circus, it was its flooding circus ring.
It fills with water then?
Yeah, absolutely. So we best get off, otherwise we're going to get wet.
Right. OK, let's go.
At the end of every show, the circus ring would fill up with 42,000 gallons of water, thanks to an ingenious hydraulic mechanism that lowered the floor.
It really bubbles out, doesn't
Look at it, isn't it fantastic?
Yeah.
It comes out and it's all done in less than a minute.
How deep is it?
The platform itself lowers 6 feet in total.
God. And they just do it just like that?
All done in that time.
So once they'd flooded it, what was the show like?
So the water finale was always the last thing that took place in the show. Clowns would topple in, the policemen trying to catch the clowns would fall in. There'd be boats that would capsize. All the audience inevitably would get soaked as well, and everybody loved it. They also included animals in the show as well, so they had performing sea lions, and they would slip in and out of the water and do sort of synchronized swimming sort of event, and it's a crazy concept, but they had diving horses and all sorts, yeah.
It must have been, to Victorians particularly, we got to put ourselves in the situation. They had no television and that kind of thing, so
absolutely.
What sort of impact do you think it made on people?
To see them performing in a ring like this, so close, you know, splashing them and all sorts of stuff, it just must have been a wonderful, wonderful experience.
Today, Blackpool Circus is still going strong, although performing animals are a thing of the past.
By the end of Queen Victoria's reign, the seaside holiday had become part of British life. The railways had opened the way for the day trip, the factories had instituted compulsory holidays, and the new engineering enabled entrepreneurs to capitalise on the growing appetite for pleasure. The hard-working Victorians had become hard-playing too. Blackpool, with its world-leading and crowd-pleasing piers and tower and pleasure palaces, had become a beacon of entertainment that built a great British tradition, the Great British Seaside Holiday.
Next time, I get to grips with the grisly realities of Victorian surgery.
Can you imagine the bone is visible?
Yep, all too easily.
Unearth the secrets of the hospital revolution.
This is a palace that is disguising its real nature.
And discover the medical miracle that saved the day for a right royal birth.
If it was good enough for a queen, it was probably good enough for them as well.